In the year 2014, I frequently used the app Uber because I wasn't able to drive for 12 months due to some DUI charges. Just a stupid mistake overall. There's this nightclub bar in my town that I would sometimes go to on the weekends with my friends. Sometimes I would get a ride home with a designated driver if we had one, and sometimes we would catch an Uber. This night I wasn't feeling too great, so I left a little early. It was somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. It was way too cold to walk home, so I called for an Uber. A guy nearby named Alex popped up, and I gotta be honest, he was a little creepy looking. He was older, didn't really smile in his picture, and he had a grayish goatee with a black beanie cap on. He was only 2 miles away, so I didn't really care. It said he had a Chevy Malibu, which sounded nice, so I requested he come pick me up. I waited on the bench outside the club next to the bouncer, who stood still like a statue, hands folded together. About 5 minutes later, a silver 2003 or something Chevy Malibu pulled up in front of the club. I stood up, a bit disappointed it was such an old, ratty-looking car. The guy didn't call me over or honk or anything, he just waited by the curb, so I got up and entered the back seat of the car. Right away, things got uncomfortable. He didn't say hello, he didn't shake my hand, he didn't even turn his head to look at me. All he said was in a very quiet voice, "Where are you headed?" To which I replied with my address. We began moving down Main Street, but in the wrong direction of my house. I told him this, and he turned left at the next intersection. Now we were moving away from the main roads and down the quieter residential areas. He didn't put my address into his phone, so I felt really strange. I didn't know if he was expecting me to direct him or not. I ended up putting my address into my own phone so he could listen. When the GPS said turn left down the next street, he completely missed it. I made a confused hand gesture. He noticed it and said, "I just gotta make a quick stop, don't worry, I'll give you a discount." Even though I was drunk, I still knew something bad was going on. Then, that's when I noticed the handgun sticking out from his middle glove box next to him. By now, I was trying to figure out how to get out of this car. At the next red light, I tried the door handle very quietly, but it wouldn't open. I saw that the child lock was on, and from this point forward, my heart was racing. The man was driving us far out of the direction of my house. We must have been 2 towns over by now. I was getting desperate. I couldn't call the cops because I didn't know what this guy might do. I figured my best option would be attempting to flick the child lock switch next to him by the front seats. I had to somehow slide over to the opposite side of the back seat behind him without him noticing. This was one of the most tense moments of my life. I locked my sight on his head through the rearview mirror, making sure he wasn't looking. I very casually slid behind him. Thankfully, he didn't notice. Now came the scariest part. I had to reach for the button up front at the next red light before he could do anything. Each light we passed, I felt more and more tension build up as I was waiting for one of them to turn yellow, and eventually, one finally did. He slowed the car at an intersection that would usually be busy during daylight hours. It was a perfect escape point. The car came to a stop. I knew this light wasn't very long, so I had to be quick. A car was stopped at the opposite side of the intersection, which made me feel a little better. With all of my courage, I reached my hand up to the lit-up child lock button, and I must have startled him because he jumped 2 inches out from his seat. He screamed at me, and as I feared he would, he went for the gun right next to him. I was able to open the door and flee to the nearby Cadillac Escalade, where I banged on their windows asking for help. They drove off, completely avoiding me, but it didn't matter because the man in his Chevy Malibu was already gone down the block. I ran into a nearby grocery store that was open 24 hours, where I called a taxi this time. This was a very sobering experience because I don't remember being drunk at all in that store or during the taxi ride home. I reported the driver to Uber, who said they would escalate the situation to the authorities. It wasn't until a whole week later that an officer finally showed up at my front door for some questioning. And that was the end of that. I have no idea what became of that guy, but I've never used an Uber since. As a former Uber driver, I've dealt with a whole bunch of unpleasant characters, from the drunken groups of friends on Saturday nights, to the people who pretend to be handicapped to get free rides. But every so often, you may pick up somebody who can just be classified as a straight-up creep. I've picked up a few of these guys, but never one quite as bad as a guy named Tom. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I had nothing to do, so I figured I'd do some late night pickups. This was 2 years ago. I was 18 and had a new Honda Accord. My parents kinda spoiled me a bit. I was a very skinny 18-year-old though. That's why my dad told me to always keep a blade in my car, because you never know what kind of nuts are getting into the car. A guy named Tom popped up a couple miles away by a major shopping area. I responded to his request and started driving in that direction. I pulled up in front of the shopping center where I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. It looked like trouble. I hoped this Tom guy wasn't part of this group. A bunch of them looked at me in my car as I slowly passed. Eventually I just hit the gas and went further into the parking lot of the shopping center, wanting to get away from this group. I did 2 laps around the whole parking lot until I finally noticed through my left mirror somebody approaching my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out Tom, and he called back yes. I told him to hop in. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and given that all I was saying was hop in very clearly, made the situation very weird from the start. The 4th time he finally understood me and walked slowly around the back, getting into the seat right behind me. Usually the people I picked up would sit diagonally from me, which is what I preferred. When people sat right behind me, it just made me a little paranoid sometimes, especially when the person seemed kinda creepy. This guy was old. He had to be in his upper 40s. "Where to?" I asked him. He told me an address, which I entered into my phone. By his voice, I could tell he was a very heavy smoker. Come to think of it, my car was starting to smell like cigarettes too. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine, since it meant I'd be making more money. I tried making small talk initially, which didn't work out too well. Like if I would ask him a yes or no question, sometimes he would just mumble, and any other questions led to dry responses. I stopped talking when he completely ignored one of my questions. That was within just 5 miles. There was still 5 to go. By the 6-mile mark, things started getting uneasy in there. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror because I was so sure that he was staring at me. I took a quick half-second glance and saw I was right. He was in fact staring at me. My body forced my foot down heavier on the gas. I wanted this ride to be over sooner. By the 8-mile mark, I started to realize we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on basically a deserted street with woods on either side and occasional buildings. I was growing suspicious now as to where this address he told me actually was. So, while driving, I dragged my finger across my phone to slide the map in the direction of the address. It seemed to lead to a dead-end street with no surrounding streets nearby. I was getting more and more nervous with each passing minute now. I shot a glance back up again at the mirror, and he was still watching me. I finally summed up the courage to ask him if the address he gave me was of his house. There was silence for a few moments, and I thought he was once again going to ignore me, or possibly didn't hear me. But 5 seconds later, he finally answered yes. There was less than a mile left in the drive now, still surrounded by nothing but woods with the occasional empty-looking building. I was approaching the dead-end street that the address he gave me resided on, hoping some houses would come into sight. As the street came up, I slowed down so I could get a good look of it. But nothing could be seen, just pitch blackness. I could only imagine why he wanted to get me out here alone, so far away from anybody or anything. I casually kept driving, pretending like I missed it, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. Instantly, he hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, I felt like my life was on the line, so I apologized and did a quick 3-point turn. As I was reapproaching the dead-end street, I dug my hands into the netting compartment on the side of my seat where I kept my blade. I very quietly flicked the blade open and held it tight in my right hand, ready to use it. I turned down the dead-end road with my headlights now displaying just what I thought I would see, nothing but trees on either side. I made it to the end of the road, not a single house or building on the road. I just knew something was about to go down. I was just trying to physically and mentally prepare myself for it. Suddenly, he said in as soft as a voice as he probably could, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even thinking about money at this point. He opened his door, but before stepping out, he said, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." But he didn't have a bag. I knew he didn't. He didn't come in with one. I replied, Yeah, sure, let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was too obvious. What happened next, I never imagined would have happened. All of a sudden, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me at least a second before I could realize he was choking me from the back seat. Immediately, I drilled the blade into his left arm and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street, and I took that opportunity to turn the car around and practically floor it down the street until I returned to a busy road. I actually didn't end up calling the cops. I was just too scared to do anything but drive home. And by the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about it. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after this incident. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and probably always will. Even makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about early 80s, I believe, she was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So driving into the city, which was about a 2-hour drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who then tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting along very well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they talked about was money and how he was pretty damn strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her one day and maybe catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of having done a good deed. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me this next part. How a week later she got a phone call from the same man she had picked up. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello, and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in the car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and even treated him to dinner, with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. The man's final words on the phone were, "Please, Nikki, please, never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, I've learned one important thing from this story, that I'm going to take that man's advice and never ever pick up a hitchhiker.
The Wrong Hitchhiker by Nathan Bartholomew. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a route I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road, just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy, first of all. He seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and then slamming it back shut. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man. Let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them.
Three months after I turned 16 in 2005, I got my first car, a 99 Toyota Camry. On a warm Saturday night, when my friend Alex invited me over to one of his friend's big parties, I knew I wouldn't be in a condition to drive the Camry home afterward. So we carpooled with Alex's girlfriend Brianna. We lived in the countryside of Virginia, meaning less big parties. Meaning when there was a big party, it was a huge deal and everyone would go. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived as I was acquainted with him, but not exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane highway type road through the woods, and this kid's house was actually on this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few houses on either side, and then it would just go back to being a long, empty highway again. The house was tiny, like a lot of houses around the area, but the party was held outside anyways, since his closest neighbors were relatively far away, and noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Brianna, who was supposed to be our designated driver, had to suddenly leave for a small family emergency. Alex said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Well, fast forward another few hours and another few drinks, and I could barely even walk straight. I checked my watch, and it was like 2 in the morning. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Alex, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like everybody I knew had already left. I could barely even think straight, but I was still furious at the fact that Alex could have actually left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Alex's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up and then realized I shouldn't wake his family up. So, literally not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking back home. I knew this walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour in my condition. Maybe after 15 minutes of walking down the road, the slight shine of car headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked where you headed. I told him my house was just down the road and beyond a right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding things the guy was asking me because I was so close to just passing out. And that's what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to a fog as I'm sure I passed out. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and laughed, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. I nervously asked, where are we going? He then said, so what were you doing out this late anyway? As the man answered my very straightforward question with another irrelevant question, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere, I told the man. The man responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag as I felt more and more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me, and that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned in his direction as I continued to gag, and he started to kind of lean away and slow down the car. Thankfully, I drank as much as I did because I finally threw up and made a point of doing it all over the man's lap. The man yelled in frustration and stopped the car, and that's when I took it upon myself to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight, and on 2 separate occasions, he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk even further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but unfortunately, he was smart enough to lock it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance, and I ran out into the middle of the street, waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled at them to help me before they came back. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man who was driving that Ford Explorer, the driver agreed to give me a lift. Not to the police station or anything, but to my house. I made it back safely where I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke up my parents and told them. My dad wanted to know if I got his tag number, and then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get the simplest information from the guy that would have allowed me to actually properly report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Alex a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since just for abandoning me at a party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now, however, and this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a year now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade, but after writing this to share with the internet, it's once again fresh in my mind.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. But be sure to keep those lights off and tune into the video that Mr. Nightmare and I have done on my channel about horrific hitchhiking murders. You can either click on screen now or in the description below to watch that video, and be sure to subscribe while you're there, because you won't want to miss what's next.
This was 4 years ago when I was an 18-year-old college student, and where I'm from, May is finals month. I spent yet another late night in the campus library until closing time, which in May is 11 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. since everyone's up late studying. I had to call an Uber to my off-campus apartment since I had arrived with a friend who left hours before me and I didn't have my car with me. I was out in the library parking lot at 11:15 when the Uber pulled up. It was a gray Toyota Camry. The driver's name was Adam. He greeted me as normal, and I sat in the back seat diagonal from him. He looked to be in his mid-40s. For the first 5 minutes of the ride, there were no words exchanged between the two of us. But then he started to ask me questions. His first question was if I was a student, which seemed a rather pointless question since I was just picked up from a college library. Next he asked how my classes are going, then how old I was. I didn't like that question. I lied and said I was 23 instead of 18. At this point I noticed he would constantly look at me through the rearview mirror as he spoke, and when he would finish what he was saying, he had this weird creepy smirk on his face. His questions were getting a little too personal for someone whose sole relationship with me was supposed to be my driver for 10 to 15 minutes. He asked how my dating life at school is, and as much as I wanted to just flat out ignore his question, I said it wasn't bad. I should have lied and said I had a boyfriend, but for whatever reason I didn't think of saying that. He transitioned from questions to making comments, like that he used to be a huge cheater in college and asked if I ever cheated. I nervously laughed and said once or twice. He then made it even weirder to no surprise and asked if I'd ever cheated on a boyfriend. I said no. At this point we were stopped at a red light. I tried my best to avoid looking at the rearview mirror, but I was too curious and snuck a peek. He was looking at me. He made a comment that I was very pretty. I knew it was coming eventually, and it still was incredibly creepy. I didn't acknowledge it. There were 2 minutes left in the ride, when I noticed he made a left turn instead of a right turn at one of the intersections. So I spoke up and told him he went the wrong way. Then he said he knows, he just has to stop at his place real quick to get something. I asked him to please just drop me off first, but he insisted his house was a minute away. And apparently it was. He stopped in front of a house and said we're here. Then he turned to me and asked if I wanted to come in, saying he had alcohol and food in case I wanted to release some stress after studying. I didn't even know what to say. I wanted to get out of the car and run, but I was scared to. I said, please just take me home. He chuckled and said he'd be right back. He went into his house, and that was when I got out from the car and started to run. No, I didn't think he had plans to murder me, but something was off about him and the situation, and I just wanted to get out of there. Moments later, I felt my phone vibrate, and it was a message from Adam the driver saying, you know I have your address, hot stuff. That just made me run even faster. I canceled the ride just so he wouldn't be able to contact me anymore. I made it back to my apartment in a few minutes. Running with my backpack was hard, but thank God I do my cardio. My apartment was the left side of a duplex. That Adam guy wasn't parked in front of my house by the time I got back, so I hoped maybe he just wouldn't come. I filled out a form on Uber.com titled Report a Serious Incident with a Driver, and I just gave all the details of the trip and included a screenshot of his message threatening that he had my address. Uber contacted me the next day, stating the driver was removed from the platform and should there be any further contact, that I should contact the authorities. Well, the next night when my roommate wasn't home because she was spending the night with the guy she was talking to, there was a knock at the front door followed by the doorbell. It was like 8 to 9 p.m., so it was kind of late for solicitors or anything like that. I called through the door, "Who is it?" And a man's voice on the other side said, "I found something that belongs to you." I asked, "Who is this and what did you find?" Their response was, "Just open up, I'll show you." The voice was familiar. I looked through the window next to the door, and I saw Adam the Uber driver hiding to the side of the door like he was pressed flat up against the wall, and he was holding something, I couldn't tell what. I ran for my phone to call 911, and sparing them all the details, I just begged for police to get to my apartment immediately. But by the time police arrived in front of the duplex, the knocks had long since stopped. He was gone, at least off the front porch, but I imagine he saw the police cars in front of the house because he never returned after that. There was this whole following up with the Uber report and the police now, but since there was no proof that it was Adam at the front door, I couldn't even press charges. The semester was over anyway, the lease was up, and I moved back home for summer. I left no trace for that Adam guy to ever find me again. At least, I don't think I did. This story still haunts me to this day, almost every day. I used to be an Uber driver as my second job, usually late at night like bar closing hours. It was a Saturday night around 3 a.m. I was a couple hours into my Uber driving night, and I got a call from across town to pick someone up on a street corner. In came some guy, African-American, mid-20s, he had dreadlocks, I noticed a small tattoo on his neck, but I didn't look much longer than that. I asked how his night's going, and he just grunted. Happens, not everyone's super friendly. I confirmed the address he gave me, which appeared to be a house, and he just said yeah. About a minute into the drive, he got a little aggressive and concerned that I apparently made a wrong turn because he thought I was taking a longer route. I assured him that I was just following the route that the app was giving me, and he calmed down. Like 10 seconds later, he asked me if I'm feeling lucky, and I asked, "What do you mean?" He follows that with, "I mean, how much do you value your life, son? Nobody really values what they got." I didn't like where this was going. I responded that I appreciate my life and kids every single day. He went silent after that for a while. Then he started saying some things at such a low volume that I didn't know if he was talking to me or not. So I asked, "What was that?" And he replied, "Nothing, fool, just get me to where I gotta be." I asked, "Where is it we're heading anyway?" He replied, "I just gotta take care of some unfinished business." I really didn't know what to make of that answer, but I wasn't looking to continue that conversation or dig any deeper than I had already dug. We pulled up to some corner in a rather poverty-stricken area, not an area I typically did any drop-offs or pickups. The guy said, "Ike, can you wait here for me?" I froze for a second, confused. I asked, "Do you need a ride back somewhere?" He replied, "Yeah, this'll be quick. I just gotta take care of some unfinished business first." I didn't want to drive this guy anywhere else, and I had a feeling whatever he was about to do in this house wasn't good, based on his unfinished business comment. I didn't want to be the getaway driver after some kind of fight or altercation, so I said, "Yeah, I'll be waiting here," but I had no intentions of waiting. The ride was marked as complete on my end anyway. He shut the car door and approached the house, but he wasn't approaching the front door. He went to the back of the house by the backyard. I didn't stick around after that. I drove off after about 20 seconds, slowly and quietly so he wouldn't hear me taking off. I chose to end my shift that night right then and there. I was pretty sketched out. The next day, I heard something on the news that changed a part of me forever. There were 2 people shot in their home in the town I dropped that guy off the night before. As the news report went on, they showed a picture of the suspected shooter, and it was the guy I dropped off at that house. He was apprehended fleeing the scene not too far away after neighbors reported hearing gunshots. The shooting was suspected to be gang-related. I have forever blamed myself for this partially, having been the one to drive someone with intentions of murdering people to his destination to commit his heinous act. People have told me if it wasn't me, it would have been another Uber driver, but I still can't help but feel partially to blame for this and not picking up on the red flags in that car ride. It was a stormy night, the first thunderstorm of the year. This was after my night shift ended at 4 a.m., and I had to call a Lyft to the train station since I didn't have my car at the time. I waited outside the place I bartended at the time, under the front patio to avoid getting soaked. A car pulled down the empty street and stopped in front of the bar. I had to check the Lyft app to ensure it was the correct car, and it was. A gray Honda Civic. I got in and greeted the driver, whose name was Sahil. I attempted to get in the front seat at first, but he told me not to and to sit in the back. That was only the second time I ever tried sitting in the front. That was before I realized it was customary to sit in the back seat. From the bar to the train station, it was about 10 minutes. The reason I was taking the train instead of just Ubering the whole way to my house is because I'd be saving about $40. The driver was going very slow, but there was nothing weird about that given the weather outside. I would expect anyone to drive cautiously in a torrential downpour like this one. The driver didn't take the highway route. He took us down the side roads. I wasn't concerned about missing my train though. I had plenty of time. I wasn't concerned until the driver said something under his breath and then pulled the car to the side of the road. I looked up from my phone to see why and saw a man in the pouring rain waving his hands in the air. I almost asked if he was stopping to pick him up, but I just observed. And yes, the man on the street got in the back passenger seat next to me. He was soaking wet. He kept his black hood on in the car. I scooted all the way over to the left. I was expecting the man and the driver to exchange some kind of words, but they didn't. Did they know each other? I had no idea what was going on. During the ride, I felt in the corner of my eyes the feeling of that man next to me looking at me. Maybe he was looking out my window, so I shot a quick half-second glance to him. But I was wrong. He was looking at me. On top of it, as the drive progressed, I started paying more attention to the route we were taking. It wasn't the right way to the train station. I tried to sneak a peek at the driver's phone screen to see if maybe he was following some incorrect route, but he seemed to have his phone on his lap, unlike most Lyft drivers who have their phones mounted on the dashboard. I politely said, "I think we're going the wrong way." He replied something in such a low tone mixed with a thick accent that I had a hard time understanding it. By the third time I asked him to repeat himself, I finally just repeated myself and said we're going the wrong way. I confirmed this by checking the map on my phone. The driver didn't acknowledge me, and I felt as though the guy next to me was inching closer every minute. He also wouldn't stop staring at me. Eventually, I asked the driver to pull over and canceled the ride. No acknowledgement. The driver was blowing stop signs, and there were no stoplights anywhere on these side roads, so I didn't really have a good time to escape, but I knew I was about to be their victim of something. This was some kind of trap, so I decided I was going to jump out of the car when I had the chance. I waited till we were on a street with woods on one side, which was perfect for me to make my escape. The car was going probably 15 to 20 miles per hour. I opened the car and jumped out. The two men screamed stuff in a different language, I'm guessing to each other. My impact with the ground was obviously painful, but I think the layer of water on the street might have cushioned my fall a little bit. The car completely stopped, and I saw the man who was next to me get out. I had to get on my feet and run into the woods. I heard him chasing after me for a little bit, but there was no shot he'd find me. I heard him yell something back to the car. It sounded like it was in Russian. Then he ran back to the car and they drove off. I immediately called an Uber instead of a Lyft this time, and this time I was brought safely to the train station. While on the train, I went ahead and filed an online police report, and then contacted Lyft and reported the driver. The next day, I also went to the police station and reported the whole incident. But here's where the bomb was dropped. There was a gray Honda Civic reported stolen just the night before. I gave them every last detail I could remember, and eventually I was on my way. I left that police station contemplating my life, and just how narrowly I may have escaped with my life. What you're about to hear was the worst night of my life. I went out to a downtown club with my boyfriend and his friends on a Saturday night. My boyfriend and I hadn't been getting along for a while, and at some point in the club, we had an argument. I didn't want to be there anymore, so I went outside and called an Uber to pick me up. It was raining that night, so I waited under the awning of a building nearby to the club. A white car pulled up in front of me and stopped. I walked over, and the woman driving rolled down the window. She said, "Uber?" And I said, "Yeah," and then her name. She said yes. So I got in the back seat. I asked, "How are you?" And I'm pretty sure she didn't answer. When I didn't hear a response to my question, I shot a glance up from my phone for a second. The woman had both hands firmly planted on the steering wheel. She was driving in a very stiff, upright position. She also had very curly hair and a somewhat darker skin complexion. She was driving down the street I usually took to get home, only she was going the opposite way. I didn't want to speak up and correct her just yet, because maybe she was taking a different route. The further we went away from my house, though, the more concerned and frustrated I got. Finally, I spoke up and told her she was going the wrong way. She said in a horrible, thick accent something about how she was going to the highway instead. I knew for a fact the highway wasn't the quicker route, though. Then, my phone vibrated, and I looked down to see the notification from Uber. It said on my screen, "Meet Uber driver now." I opened up the app, and it said my Uber had just arrived at the point I was originally standing at, and that the car I was supposed to get in was a black Nissan. At this point, I started saying in a louder voice to the driver that she wasn't my Uber. I asked her to pull over and let me out, and when she didn't seem to acknowledge me, I started to actually yell and push at her seat. Even though the car was moving, I even tried opening the door, but the child lock was apparently on. After a little more yelling, she finally looked at me through the mirror, then pulled off to the side. The door clicked unlocked, and I got out of the car and walked away from it. My actual Uber driver was calling me, and I picked up, apologizing, asking him to come to my current location. He said he'd be right over. 5 minutes later, the car pulled up. When I got in the car, I explained everything to him, and he stopped the car, looked at me, and told me I just escaped a sex trafficking trap. There had been reports of multiple fake Ubers going around trying to trick unsuspecting victims into getting into the car to lure them to unknown locations. It was apparently part of a sex trafficking ring, and the drivers were usually female to appear less intimidating to the female victims. I just want to stress to everyone to make sure the car you're getting into is actually your Uber. One night when I was decently drunk after leaving a bar, I started messaging people on Tinder. Some girl named Alicia had messaged me, so I messaged her back. She answered almost immediately, asking what I was doing that night. I said I was just leaving a bar looking for someone to hang out with. She wrote back, "You should come over and smoke." I said, "Yeah, send me your address." She sent back her address promptly. It seemed like the quickest, easiest, most ideal Tinder match a guy could ask for on a Saturday night. I called for an Uber to drop me off at that address. The driver pulled up in his Honda, and I got in the front seat. Usually I would get in the back seat, but I was decently drunk and feeling extra social. The driver seemed cool. I was honest with him about where I was going, telling him I was about to meet a girl from Tinder. He laughed and said nice, and started going on about his stories meeting girls as an Uber driver and such. On the way there, I asked Alicia for her number, and she gave it to me. I started texting her, and she gave normal answers. When we got to the house, the driver said the house seemed familiar to him. Had to admit it did look a little sketchy since there were no cars in the driveway and the lights were off. He told me to be careful. I thanked him and said goodbye, and he drove away down the block and stopped near the end, I'm guessing setting up his next ride. I walked up to the house and tried to ring the bell, but I didn't hear a bell from the inside, so I knocked on the door. Then I tried calling Alicia. It went to voicemail after one ring, but she texted me right after saying it's open, come inside. Then there was a knock at the window, which almost gave me a heart attack. I looked at the window, and even though there were no lights on inside, I saw the blind was slightly lifted, and someone was waving their hand on the other side of the window. Before I tried the door, a number not saved on my phone started calling me. I assumed it was Alicia, so I picked up. But instead of hearing the voice of a girl, I heard the familiar voice of my Uber driver. He ordered me in a very concerned voice to walk away from the house right now. I then saw the Uber driver's car pull back up in front of the house. He told me to get back in the car. I hung up the phone and listened to him. As soon as I got in the car, he drove away from the house and told me that the house was vacant. In just the previous month, someone had been lured into that house, robbed, and murdered. It was a story that likely could have been similar to my own had I stepped into that house. It was a lot for me to take in, but I thanked that Uber driver the best I could, and even took his number because he was so cool and I couldn't appreciate him enough. The next morning when I was sober, this was even more disturbing to think about. It was a Monday night, a slower night for an Uber driver, especially in our bum-ass town. So when a trip request popped up on my screen, I jumped on it. I was picking up a guy named John. I drove across the neighborhood to a corner liquor store that was closed at this hour. There were two young guys waiting on the corner, and when I pulled up to the curb, they got in the car. I confirmed John's name to make sure he was who I was picking up. Then I started heading to their destination. The two whispered to each other, and it was a little odd. I looked at the rearview mirror every once in a while, and every time I did, they would both notice and look back at me. I kept trying not to look, but I found myself accidentally doing it over and over. I asked them where they were headed. Neither of them answered. I figured they didn't hear me because the back window was open and there was wind noise. So I asked again. This time one of them yelled Harris Avenue. It didn't answer the main point of my question, which was to be polite and make small talk, but it did let me know these two were not exactly people I wanted in my car. I felt my big toe press a bit harder on the gas instinctively, just knowing I wanted to get there sooner. We got to the street, but the apparent address they wanted me to pull up to was some rundown storefront with a group of guys in front. I slowed down and asked if this was it. I turned around to face them, and saw they were both wearing masks now, similar to the masks from the movie The Purge. I felt something press up against the back of my shoulder. I assumed it was a gun. They told me pull up to where the guys were outside. I did so, and three big guys also wearing masks came up to my window, demanding my wallet. I gave it to them without hesitation, and the two guys in the back seat got out. The five masked men all together walked away from my car, one of them kicking at my door while passing. I drove away and reported it to Uber, who said they'd get in contact with the authorities. It turned out the info used on that John person's account was all fake, and he was using a stolen credit card. I lost $250, my IDs, and countless cards in my wallet, but I'm just happy I escaped with my life. After leaving a friend's Super Bowl party, I called an Uber to drive me home. When I got in the Uber, there was a guy in a baseball hat sitting in the back seat. I didn't say anything to acknowledge it, I just said hi to the driver. I figured I must have called an Uber pool instead of just a regular Uber. I didn't care though. We got to my house, I got out of the car and shut the door. I heard a second door shut on the other side though. When the car drove away, I saw the guy who had been sitting next to me in the baseball hat, standing in the street, facing in my direction, but his head down so that his hat was covering his face. I said, "What's up? What's going on?" He started to walk away. Still, I knew something was going on. So instead of walking to my house, I started walking around the block. I saw the man on the opposite sidewalk across the street walking in my same direction. When there was an intersection in the street, I turned. When I saw he did the same thing, I ran. When I saw he started to run too, the adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted faster than I'd ever ran in my life. I ran faster than him, and when I made it to my house, I ran to the backyard before he could possibly see where I went. Then I went into the house. I called the Uber driver at once, and he told me the guy next to me said he knew the next guy the Uber driver would be picking up, which ended up being me. The driver had his info, so he said he would report the guy. I don't know what happened because I never called or texted the Uber driver again. I also don't know why exactly that guy would be targeting people getting out of Ubers, but it definitely taught me to be more cautious with Uber rides. Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pinged almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me, but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remembered thinking he sounded a little off. Not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving, and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" He said, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated, but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide what to do. The ride was technically still going. I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, but I also felt like something wasn't right. My gut told me this guy wasn't just heading inside to grab something. Finally, I ended the trip manually. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway, but before I could shift into reverse, I saw him walking back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, and he had this strange look on his face, like he was angry or excited. I unlocked the doors because I didn't want to make it a confrontation, but something in me was screaming not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked, "What other place?" He said, "Just drive, I'll tell you." I said, "You need to put it in the app." He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the mirror. I said again, "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app." He didn't say a word. After a few seconds, he told me to drive to where I picked him up. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I started heading back toward the strip mall. The whole way there, I felt this pressure in the car. He wasn't talking, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He was still staring at the back of my head. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. I said, "Rough night?" He replied, "You could say that." I asked if everything's all right, and he said, "Not yet." I didn't ask any more questions. When we got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I picked him up, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, and after a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close the door right away. He just stood there for a second, half in and half out of the car. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. You picked the wrong guy up tonight. I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the backseat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car. This happened in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a lot of tourists, especially in the summer, so rideshare gigs can be decent money if you're consistent. I worked mostly nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because it's less traffic and better tips from drunk passengers coming back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a pretty normal Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college kids who wouldn't stop yelling in the back of my car, so I was glad to get a request that looked quieter. The name said Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The weird thing was, the pin was in kind of an odd area, not near any bars or apartments, more like near the back lot of an old strip mall. But I figured maybe it was just a bad GPS marker. It happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris?" He nodded and got in the back without saying much. He didn't smell like alcohol or slur his words. He seemed sober and just really quiet. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I asked how his night was going. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away, in a suburban neighborhood I'd been to maybe once or twice before. The thing was, it was dark out there, like no streetlights in some areas. Pretty isolated. I noticed about 5 minutes into the trip that Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling anyone. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, just shining the beam upward, slightly toward my seat. I asked him kind of half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the hum of the engine and a weird tension building in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Something just felt off about this guy. Not threatening, but definitely unsettled, like he wasn't really there. We got to the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house. But as we pulled up, I noticed it was totally dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. I asked, "Is this the right place?" Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around and looked at him. I repeated myself a little louder, saying, "Hey, is this it?" He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. So I asked again, "Are you good?" He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, and then a full minute. I was just about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and said, "Back where?" He said, "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat with no emotion. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He begged me, saying, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. I said, "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and looked empty. I waited until he got to the porch before I pulled off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A couple blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, I felt like my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie and same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was in the back of the car. I opened the driver's side door and stepped back in slowly, keeping my eye on him through the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough for me to hear his breath, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" And he said, "My parents." I asked him if he lived there, and he said not anymore. That made the hairs stand up on my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me was screaming not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, there were still no lights, still no signs of anyone living there. He got out without saying anything and then walked up to the front door and stood there. He didn't knock or anything, he just stood still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes trying to process what just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime technically as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, and honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police because the man might have been sick in the head needing help. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. I'm an 18-year-old girl that lives alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. I never thought anything of Uber Eats being bad. You may hear some stories, but never think they will happen to you. At least that's what I thought. It was Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends, so I usually try to get it cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, as I just cleaned them all and cleaned the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I ordered my food and got the notification that my driver was on his way and driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set to leave my order at my door for contactless delivery. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food was delivered. As soon as I got that notification, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab my food, it wasn't there, so I thought maybe he set it at the wrong door. But looking down at all the doors, none of them had the food at them. So I went back in and was gonna message him when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor. He was holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry, I picked up your food from your delivery driver because he was looking through your windows and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food and thanked him, wondering what the hell just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and enjoyed a movie when I started to get ready for bed. I took a shower, then went to turn off my TV and make sure all my doors were locked before going to bed. I laid down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up a few times during the night to my dog growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Morkie, but it's still pretty scary when he growls at something and catches you off guard. I finally got him to calm down and go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog started going crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move in my bed. I I took the bed sheets and pulled them over my head, just leaving enough to not cover my eyes so I could see the window. I called the police and whispered into the phone quietly. I explained to the operator that someone is in my backyard and my window doesn't lock so it can easily be lifted up. She told me to go to a different room and police would be in my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife, just waiting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen and never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's car that delivered my food. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left that's used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put two and two together and thought to myself, he's in my backyard. The police finally arrived. I could barely even speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained to one officer what happened, while the other went to check out my backyard, which is where my bedroom window is. Another officer who arrived went to check his car because it was still in the field, but he wasn't in his car. The two officers came back and started talking with the officer I was speaking to, telling her there's footprints in my backyard, which it had just rained the night before, so it was very muddy outside. I started panicking once I heard that, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy if he didn't come back arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained to him what was happening. Then he spoke about how he picked up my food for me earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer, and when all the cops left, I went back into my apartment. Thinking it was all over, I took a few hours to get comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I got up and went to my front door, scared to open it. It was the woman I spoke to earlier. She explained they stayed at my apartment, hidden to watch for that guy in case he showed back up, and he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he was going to try to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. I was 26 at the time and I'm male. I was in Washington, D.C. on a sort of vacation visiting my then fiancée. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the story. I was visiting for a graduation she was having for her basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I said why not and booked the flight to be there. I'd be arriving about a week before the rest of her family, so she and I could have some time, just the two of us, before she would be busy with having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided we wanted to go and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington had to offer. I'd never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest and we decided to do it. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sights, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It really was a fun and exciting experience for myself to see all these places, as I had missed out on going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them as well, and we really enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided we had enough walking around and were ready to return to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it earlier to arrive and had no issues, so we decided to just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone, while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we did, and I could feel my body just ready to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us along the side of the road. Sarah motioned for me that this was the car, as the place they stopped at was not a parking spot or a place a car would just stop at on its own. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the man, "Uber for Sarah?" And he gave a slight nod without saying anything, so I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realized how stupid both her and myself were in doing this. We should have asked for the driver's name and verified the car was a match to the one on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, and she made the request on her phone, so it didn't really cross my mind at the time to do any of this. As we both sat in the back of the car, which was a gray-colored minivan, the driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd, as any other driver I'd ever had would at the very least greet me once I entered or confirmed my name. But this guy, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us, other than the nod he gave when Sarah asked him if he was our Uber, and I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired and didn't really feel like trying to engage with the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah after what felt like only 5 minutes of the drive. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. She then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route had said. In fact, it was the opposite way. I could see Sarah's face drain with color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized how dumb I was by not verifying the car and driver before we just both stepped in. The picture that was on Sarah's phone within the app did not match the driver, and I knew we had gotten ourselves into a situation. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew at that moment, I had to get both Sarah and I out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were in an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man of what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror in the first actual acknowledgement of us he had given since we stepped into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a word in what felt like minutes, but was probably only 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car though. He didn't even say a word in response to me, and just kept driving the car as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade out, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here, or what you think you're about to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it." The driver's eyes quickly looked at me again within the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see the knife gripped tightly in my hand. He quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I wasted no time in getting out of that car as fast as we could. The moment we were both out, the man sped off. We quickly took a moment to gather ourselves as Sarah was having a panic attack, and I myself was still wrapping my head around what the hell just happened. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and responded to our actual Uber driver, and informed him of our location and asked if he could come pick us up. The actual driver arrived within a few minutes, and this time we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and it was then that he informed us something that made the blood in my veins go cold. He told us there had been multiple instances recently where people were posing as Uber drivers in the area, as it was an easy way to find many tourists and people not from the area that wouldn't think twice about just getting into a car thinking it was a Lyft or Uber. Apparently, many people had gone missing and they could only assume the worst. He told us both we were lucky we noticed when we did, and hadn't gotten further away from where we had been picked up, which was probably the only reason the man let us go, and of course the fact that I was armed. We made it back to the hotel without issue, and we quickly reported it to the police. We gave the best description of the man and the car that we both could, and the police told us they'd call us with any information they could find. We never heard back from them, so I assume the man was never caught or found, and that worries me that he could still be out there doing this to others. Again, I realized how stupid we both were after all this, not verifying whose car it was we were getting into, but let this be a reminder to everyone listening, do just that. Always verify your Uber drivers, and always make sure you're aware of your surroundings.